Mr. Sullivan.
Yes, Mr. Jackson, it's good to hear your voice again.
Here we are at Procrastination Headquarters,
where you can only participate if you didn't procrastinate.
That is exactly right. So, I'm going to be seeing you in next week.
Yeah, we'll be actually sooner than that. We'll actually probably on Thursday.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'm leaving. I'm going to be there on Tuesday. Get it a couple of days ahead of time.
Yeah.
So
for those of you who are listening, we're going to Genius Network, where we'll be with our great friend Joe Polish.
That is exactly right. So what has been going on in the world of the Joy of Procrastination Toronto division this week?
Yeah, well, I actually reported on the meeting I had in Chicago the week before, where we had 15 of our team members in the Chicago office, and they love the procrastination priority. But this past Tuesday, which will be news to you, we started a brand new 10 times workshop with 63 new people.
Oh,
and we introduced the procrastination priority mid-afternoon as a setup for doing their first 90-day planning. And it was terrific, and everybody got right into it. And, we didn't have a lot of time for conversation, but with this new group, we also do a follow-up workshop on the Tuesday, or on the Wednesday, as it turned out to be. And a lot of them came up to me and said, it's a very, very, very new thought to think about procrastination as some sort of resource, as some sort of source of energy. So I had a discussion, and it's almost like I was thinking of oil and gas, that for most of human history, this was just considered a nuisance if you had, oil coming out of the ground, or you had...
Makes your feet all sticky, yeah.
Yeah, it gets, and everything else, and then it became the most powerful energy source in the world. And I was just thinking along those lines, something that was considered useless in human thinking, not only useless, but shameful. In a matter of about 15 months, we've been able to turn this into a energy source for people.
Yes. Well, I was just at an event here in Orlando, a marketing event, and there were a few hundred people there, but there were several people that came up to me and made a point of commenting about how much they're loving our Joy of Procrastination, how much it's making a difference for them. And so that's it's great. It's getting out there. I did something fun. I did something fun this week, Dan. I did a live on Facebook 50-minute focus finder. And just to demonstrate what it actually looks like, all I did, because when I do it, I have my my purpose for what I'm going to work on in that 50-minute focus finder, and I have my comfortable club chairs, and I have my timer, and I have the music all queued up, ready to go, and so I turned on the camera, the Facebook live broadcast, and just really said to people, "Hey, I'm going to do a live 50-minute focus finder. This is what it looks like, and here's the music and the timer, and here we go." And just let the camera run for 50 minutes as I was sitting there doing my hatching evil schemes. And it was just the most. It was funny. We had about 750 people, watch this live stream of just sitting with nothing but music in the background and me sitting there concentrating for 50 minutes.
I was just thinking of your grade school teacher watching you.
Oh.
He's even worse than he was before.
That's right. I mean? That ain't working. That's right. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And there's 750 people watching. It
was something. I mean, that's kind of a funny thing.
Dean Jackson wasting his abilities.
Yes, exactly. Imagine if I applied myself.
It's a new world we're living in with this social media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, really. I was just reading an article, and I had an interesting breakfast on Friday, and I was introduced to the man who in the Canadian Parliament is the finance critic. So he's in the opposition party. And so when the finance minister who is in the government makes any kind of announcement or there's any issue brought up, then he's the critic. And that's, in parliamentary government, you have an official opposition and they're kind of at you every day. And so he was in the government before, and then they lost 2 years ago. And but very bright, youngish. He's 38, and really very, very sharp. But I was telling him, if he had any political, ambitions beyond where he is right now. And he was elected when he was 25 years old, so he's been in elected office since 2004. And I said, and I just told him about this article I'd read that 70% of Americans are now getting their news through social media. They're no longer watching mainstream media. They're no longer reading mainstream media. They're getting their news through social media. And I think that's a profound change, in a relatively short period of time.
Yes. And there's an interesting conversation that I had last night that would match up with that, and kind of somebody showed on Twitter how all the people who were sort of like the far right and then the far left, that none of them they were all connected to each other, but not to the opposite.
Yes.
Which is pretty wild when you think about it, right? Like so it becomes, especially on Facebook, if you think about in the news feed, that all the one worldview news is being filtered and echoed and amplified within all the people who agree with that, because, let's show them more of this. And then all the people on the other side are getting the thing. So it's like, it's not a clear representation of what's actually going on in the news. The young man that I had this conversation with last night lives in South Korea, and was saying, I asked him, like, what's that like right now going on, And he said, it's no different right now than it's been for 30 or 40 years. It's like, it's just here in the U.S., the news is dominated by this and sensationalized by what North Korea, the moves. And his take was that, they've done crazy things like this all the way through history, but they also know that there's a line to not go beyond, and everybody, it's like they're, I don't know how to describe it, but I guess in South Korea, they just look at it as, well, that's just normal. It's not they're not sitting on pins and needles any more worried that things are getting worse than they've ever been, It's kind of some interesting thing.
I did my military duty in South Korea, so I was there in the 1960s. So it's, I was there 50 years ago, and there were always incidents that were happening at what's called the DMZ, at the border between North and South Korea. There'd be shooting and there'd be ambushes, and I think while I was there were about 12 American troops killed, in ambushes, and probably an equal number of the enemy was. But it was always, we were put on high alert about 3 or 4 times in a 2-year period, and but everybody went about their life. I mean, nobody really battened down and hit stocked up on food or anything. But it's it's just one of those places that first of all, they're separated by centuries. The quality of life in South Korea is now, it's equal to Europe. I mean, the way the South Koreans live now, they're on a quality of life scale the same as, maybe not France, but one of the European countries, let's say Estonia or Latvia, or maybe and the North, they're like several centuries behind. I mean, in terms of the economy and the quality of their life, education, and everything else. I mean, when East and West Germany were put together, it was like a 40 or 50 year separation. But if those two countries, North and South Korea, ever got put together, it would be like making up a couple of centuries. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. But the closer you are to danger, the more normal it seems. I've been to Israel, and they live with it. I mean, they're just a dozen, in some cases, a dozen miles away from possible outbreak of violence, and they get up in the morning and they go about their business. They check. They'll make phone calls and say anything we should avoid or anything like that. But it's really, really interesting how people normalize unusual conditions and just make it a normal part of life.
Yes. Joe Polish and I had Offer Breyer on our I Love Marketing podcast. And that was a conversation that we had, that Offer seems to think that that's part of that gives Israelis a sense of urgency in a way that has in terms of like the entrepreneurial part of it, or getting things out. It's kind of an interesting thing, but not a sense of doom or anything, like not a negative way that they're constantly worried. It's just that there's this sense of, we got to get this done.
Yeah, they don't make real long range plans, as individuals. I mean, they're always about something and they're doing it, but it's fairly short when you. I spent 2 evenings with Offer. I was in Tel Aviv, and we went out 2 evenings in a row, and I was asking him about that specific thing. He says, "Well, don't plan too much more than a quarter ahead or a half a year ahead," he says, because you don't know how conditions are going to change, during that time. So you don't want to go too far out. But it's really, really interesting how they kind of normalize what for most people would be just almost unlivable conditions. So my just to go back to your point about the man from Korea that you were talking about. Actually, the closer you are to trouble, the more you're calm with it. The further away you are, and first of all, there's a huge emotionalism in the way that the news is the news is presented these days. If you didn't watch the news, you wouldn't think there were any crises in the world.
Right.
I think crisis is a word. A crisis is a word that's actually been coined by the media to get your attention, but it's not describing something real. It's just that they're in high competition to get you to pay attention to them. And crisis is a word that they actually use to get your attention. But in fact, it's an invented reality that they're talking about. The people there aren't actually experiencing the crises. The crisis is a vehicle for communicating something that they want you to watch them and not some other news media.
Wow, very interesting. That I don't know whether I had this conversation with you, but talking about, we just saw it happen with the Hurricane Irma that came through Florida, that the news is dominated by this daunting red fireball working its way, across the ocean, making its way to Florida, and this impending doom that's coming. And it got me thinking, like 100 years ago, we would have had no idea that a hurricane was even coming. Yeah, to Winter Haven or coming through the thing, because all the way up to it's beautiful, sunny weather, calm, nice. It's like, what a nice day this is. And then all of a sudden, over a total of a 12-hour period with a probably 4-hour peak period, the weather would completely change overnight. And they'd wake up in the morning and say, wow, it was really windy and rainy last night, wasn't it? And then go on with their beautiful day again, rather than all this crisis for the week leading up to it as it's inching its way through on its way to Florida. It was funny because it made me think about energy, right? And how our energy levels, if we think about in the old procrastination world, when people were procrastinating as a bad thing and waiting for this impending deadline as the only thing that gets people into action, that the energy level goes up and people actually miraculously are able to get things done. Yeah. And it's interesting how, if we can manage that, that level of energy production on the front end, it becomes so much more empowering.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about the habit that you have in the day of, and I have the habit the night before of kind of allowing a certain kind of pressure to come from certain projects, and say, okay, tomorrow we got to get busy on this. We got to get something started on it. Or, for you, today I'm gonna work on that. And it just struck me how much in the year and some months that we've been doing the podcast is that I just accept this as kind of like the tide coming in. I mean, every day I get the tide comes in with new activities for me to do tomorrow, and it presents me with a whole series of possibilities, and I just kind of look at them and I say, well, 3 of them, this one, and I'll get that structured in the morning so that for the most part I'll have all 3 of them done by noon or put in someone else's hands. We've moved forward on them. And I've just accepted it as a daily cycle, and I don't try to anticipate what I'm going to feel tonight. So, I'm sitting here, it's just a little past noon in Toronto, and I say, gee, I wonder what the 3 things are going to be for tomorrow. But my mind sort of resists it. Well, tonight you'll know. Don't be thinking about it right now.
Tonight you'll know. Yeah.
And that's a different thing. That's a totally different approach than I was experiencing a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, this idea of not worrying that we're going to be blanked at any time. Have you ever, in the year and a half, Dan, thought and asked that question at night, what have you got for me for tomorrow, and come up without an answer?
No. As a matter of fact, there's a shuffling and sort of competition among a whole bunch of issues that want to get to the front of the line and be chosen for tomorrow. So my feeling is that there's just an endless lot of them, but one, I'd never get to all of them. So I don't even have to know behind number 3 who's number 4 in the line. It's not important for me to know what the 4th one is. It's just important for me to know what the first 3 is, and because if I get those done, say I take the first 3 and I get them structured in my mind, and I set up my tomorrow morning to get these in place, and I use delegation tools for the most part. I'll do my part, but my part is usually just say what needs to get done and then get the directions in the hands of people who actually do things. And then when I get to tomorrow night, well, things have changed because 3 new activities have been launched that day. So I can't say that what I didn't get to tonight will still be important tomorrow night, because the whole landscape can have changed as a result of me just focusing on 3 things. So therefore, I don't even really have to think about them, because I don't know how things are going to change in a 24-hour period.
Yeah, that's true. It really is. I've been experimenting, like, in the evolution of this with my that process that I'm using now is on an index card in the in 10 minutes, one unit of just thinking and putting the things in the categories of people or projects that these are the people that are the procrastination is telling me are the ones to jump to the top here, and these are the projects or the things that are the candidates for what would I like to do today, and then I pick the top 3 out of that. So I end up with my 3 from considering maybe 10 options to see what the 3 are, and sometimes I get into the bonus territory, as you call it, which I like. Yeah, and that's kind of I think that in itself has really been a fantastic thing. The other element, and I may have mentioned this one other time, but I've been kind of amplifying it now, is spending time each day thinking, because I've always got a hold of this, what would I like to do today, but thinking about what would I like to do tomorrow. Tomorrow meaning both literally tomorrow and figuratively the broader tomorrow, because some of the things that what Stephen Covey would call the quadrant 2 things, I guess, which are the important and not urgent things, may never come up on a procrastination roll call, that you're not, there's no need for it to be. So in a way, that almost is creating a procrastination in itself that wouldn't show up otherwise, right? Because there's no urgency to thinking about a possibility in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like here's here's a thought, and I've just been playing with it because I'm constantly in communication with Peter Diamandis about the technological world, you know, and there's an aspect of technology which I find quite negative, and that is that there's an endless number of possibilities that you can think about. And so, you know, we could do this and we can do this and we're going to do this. But it's got the added quality that it's using technology at the core. It's using microchip technology, which has an exponential quality. So there's an endless number of possibilities that are being multiplied exponentially. And I see it a bit crazy making. There's kind of a crazy making quality about this. And it's the same thing that what I'm noticing is along the lines of the social media that we were talking about, that the individuals who live in that world only talk to individuals who are involved in this endlessly exponential type thinking, and they hype each other up. There's this hyping that goes on in the technological world, and it's all making up stuff. You know, it's making. I'm not talking about things that actually exist. I'm not talking about present capabilities that they can use, you know, better in the next 90 days. I'm talking about, you know, mining on the moon and mining on Mars, and you know, and digging, you know, hyperloop tunnels from from San Francisco to Los Angeles, and without giving any thought that you're passing under people's properties, and some of them may get their lawyer to stop it for 6 months or a year, you know, just and everything. And it just seems to me that you know, this is a form of hallucination. Actually, you know, it's when you get isolated, where you're only hearing your own thoughts, there's a tendency to hallucinate. And I'm just noticing, you know, that one of the things we're seeing more and more in the news media is hallucinatory warnings and hallucinatory, promises and excitement and everything else. And I think it goes directly back to what you talked about at the beginning of the podcast, is that within this communication bubble that people find themselves out, it keeps getting louder and louder, but it's the same thing being repeated over and over again. You know, everybody is talking about it.
To the people who are in agreement with it. Right.
Yeah. And I think why we've broken through this with our procrastination priority thing is that we're kind of hallucinating when we're procrastinating, because we're entertaining a lot of things in our brain that are competing, but they don't really have any reality to them because we haven't gotten to them yet. You know, it's not like we've made decisions about these things. It's not like we've, put deadlines to them. We haven't put measurable results to them. And I think what we're doing, Dean, you and I, in this exercise is that we're unhallucinating ourselves, and that's really what happens when you use procrastination to identify actual real things that you're going to do. And it's not in the future, it's between now and tomorrow. Tomorrow at this time, we're going to do 3 things and move forward on these 3. And I think we're unhallucinating ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, that's. I think that when you look at this idea of this things getting louder and louder, there's the danger that's happening within our own internal dialogue of the things that we're continually faced with, right? The things that we constantly procrastinate. And it's been I look back now. I was reflecting this morning, actually, on the things that have actually made the impact for me of over the last 15 months or whatever it is that we've been doing this. And one of those things is setting in place the things that are, I have a lot more things in the recurring column that have come from asking myself this question, what would I like to do tomorrow, or kind of looking to create a systemic solution to the recurring things that come up. And so the idea with my More Cheese, Less Whiskers podcast of, having this flow of every week that is going out, and from that I get two emails that also go out. So I have 3 emails a week, 1 podcast a week, and it's all driven from the system of putting the recording times on my calendar and setting up Lillian in charge of just filling those slots, so that all I do around that is I dial up the phone and I talk and I'm done, just like the way we do this podcast. But that system came from I had to spend some units of time thinking about that, how to set up that system so that it becomes a recurring thing where there's no my days now almost have a balance of the things that I've set up for myself to do. Like when you look at your calendar, you wake up in the or have your conversation at night saying, what would I like to do tomorrow? Or what have you got for me tomorrow? A lot of the things you already know exactly what's happening because you have a workshop day that was scheduled in as a result of a system that you said you started a new group with 63 people this week, but that took a lot of units of a lot of people's time ahead of time to make that happen, and that becomes procrastination proof, really.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost I'm seeing as you're talking, I'm seeing here that there's a measurement of success. How successful are you in life, and it's the amount of recurring productive achievement that you're going to have tomorrow that was already set up. In other words, it was already, and it actually does. The types of things that go on my procrastination thing at night that I'm going to do tomorrow are new things. They're not the recurring things that are already in the schedule.
Right.
I was driving home with Babs on Friday night, and I said, I just had an incredibly productive week. I didn't, from Friday morning of the previous week until this just 2 days ago. So it was a complete week. I said, I've done 9 podcast calls with 4 different people. I've done 7 videos of varying lengths. I've worked with the cartoonist to create 4 pages of cartoons. I've done 2 all-day workshops, and that's it. But I did that. But all those things were set up. In other words, all I had to do was show up.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do any new stuff for any of that activity. All I had to do was show up and be 100% just be 100% present with the activity for an hour. In the case of workshops, it's for 8 hours. But I already knew what I was going to do during those 8 hours. I mean, and so if you compare that week with a week I had 5 years ago, it would be 10 times more productive than a week I had 5 years ago. And it's all because of the the structuring of more and more recurring achievement.
Mm-hmm. And that, it fits so, well when you go a little bit deeper into the thought that got you to free days, focus days, and buffer days, which was athletes and entertainers. That whole model, that athletes and entertainers at the highest levels, the most successful athletes and entertainers, already know for a good, most of their time what's actually going to happen, because there are all the things that were set up ahead of time to make those happen. It's not a lot of wondering and trying to make things up from scratch on a daily basis. They know like the top entertainers who maybe are on tour it's already set up that they know where they're where they're going, where their concert is, and they have everybody around them that as much as possible it gets as close to all they're doing is the performing and talking about the performing, right? If they're doing media events or anything leading up to it. And so it's really, you're modeling that in a lot of ways. And the more that I follow in that path, am modeling that by setting up those things to be recurring, setting up the team that makes those things happen.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. If you just take my workshop day, the new one where I had the 63, new participants in the 10 times level, the income from that day, but let's say the 4 days in the year, because each of my workshops is 4 days, where I'm required. And the income from that is greater than our first 3 years in business. If I go back to 1989 to 1992, the income from this one workshop group, 4 days, 4 days of my time. And the other thing is that what I coached on that day required no new innovation on my part. It was just structured in. I spent maybe a half hour with Kathy Davis, who is my, really structures things, and then she gets to make sure that all the materials are there, the multimedia is right, the binder is right, and everything else. So I spent about a half hour a month previously to get that right. And then the getting of the 63 people into the workshop required none of my time whatsoever. That was all done by our sales team. So I had no sales time involved with it. And what we do with the 10 times program, because I have the little books, the quarterly books. So this time this workshop was sold out 3 months previously. So during the final 10 weeks before each of the people came to Tuesday's workshop, they received one of the books per week. So they had 10 books. And I had nothing to do with that. Those books were all sent out, letters were sent out with them and everything like that. And so it's really the entertainment model that you were talking about, is literally my only involvement was to get a good night's sleep, and to show up. I just basically showed up for 8 hours and, did what I know how to do, but with full attentions, because I wasn't thinking about anything else during that day. So that's really, I'm seeing the power of that just based on your pointing it out. But what each of us is constantly using our nightly our nightly or first thing in the morning procrastination alert to, if we're really successful with them, each of these is going to go into something that is recurring achievement later on.
Yes, that's exactly right. I would be curious to hear what the days were like in 1989 when you're saying, like, so it was, here we are, and you have one workshop that made more money than the first 3 years of Strategic Coach. What were your days? What were the activities that you were involved in then? If you contrasted, would you say that you were working harder then?
Oh yeah. I was working a lot harder, and I was very involved in the sales process. So I had to be talking to people. I had to be phoning people, and in comparison with the materials, the known solutions that I can call upon 28 years later, I mean, we had very few. We had basically the strategy circle in 1989, and the whole workshop was structured on a single form called the strategy circle, which is still a terrific exercise, and we still used it. We still use it very, very early in the game, but I don't coach it. Somebody else coaches it, and so the you were very small. I mean, you were worried about next month. You were worried about this month's cash flow. You you just began, and you didn't have a lot of money in the bank, and and you were concerned, and we didn't have the credibility that we had back then. We didn't have the referral network that would just we can almost, by the number of referrals, for every 5 referrals that I get from a 10 times client, I get one sign up to the program during the next 12 months after I've received the referral.
Wow.
I mean, we just have the numbers. We just have the numbers worked out, the number of referrals we got. Well, this year I'll get about 700 referrals from the 10 times workshop. Divide by 5, that's 140. So that basically fills my 2 new workshops going forward,
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the recurring achievements you have, the, a known credibility in the market.
Right.
Yeah, and it's all cumulative. It's a cumulative effect, and there's kind of exponential growth. But you can't be, I've got this marked down on blackboards, and we're constantly looking at the numbers.
Right.
So it's not like you can go to sleep on this. I mean, you got to be alert to it, because you can do a slicer.
That's the thing that I've noticed about that it's not hidden off on secret blackboards in darkened rooms. It's out in the middle of the cafe. Yeah. For everybody.
Yeah, I bet I look when I'm in the cafe. I bet I look at those blackboards probably a dozen times during the day, and I'm just looking at the numbers, and I'm thinking about something, and everything else. And but I'm really big about having all the crucial numbers in view for everybody who's involved with them. I think, first of all, they know the numbers are being looked at all the time, and that's part of the message to keep them alert. And I like that they're on blackboards. It's not on a computer screen. Because a person has to come in every day and actually change the numbers. And I like that. It's an analog experience. I feel good about that experience. Yeah. But this is a very interesting thing. What I'm getting out of this is that we're starting to put some, importance about the things that come up as our procrastinations. And one of the questions you got to ask is, if I take action on this, will this become a recurring achievement? In other words, if I go through the effort to actually put it in place, will it become not an achievement just once, but it'll be a recurring achievement?
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking about this, the impact of asking the right kind of what would I like to do tomorrow question.
Yeah.
Because if what you'd like to do tomorrow is set up things that have a naturally recurring system to keep you in the joy zone, the things that you actually really like in your unique ability. There's something really relaxing about that. Like I find, and I've had this conversation with my team, that I just feel so relaxed about, I did something this year that under your guidance and from our conversations of mapping out the entire year of of my Breakthrough Blueprint events, and mapping out that I know, like going into January was when I made the decision that I'm going to have the three emails going out a week. One, More Cheese, Less Whiskers podcast. Here's when we're doing the event. Here's the dates I'm doing my email mastery programs. So I find these things that I've set up as recurring, elements in my calendar. Achievements are things that are that I don't have to think about them anymore. It's almost like you're creating this self-generating kind of loop,
Yeah, well, it's that's the basis for the next level above the self-managing company is the self-multiplying company. In other words, that it's not just that you're not going backwards. In other words, things are being managed so you're not going backwards. But it's actually that you are going forward in an increasing way, but it's not requiring your effort to do that.
Yeah. It's all exciting times. I mean, it's so. Yeah,
I was thinking about this. I mean, this is. I hope this doesn't take us too far off track, but I've been, we just passed Columbus Day, in the States, and there's a lot of controversy about Columbus. Now we people that we grew up thinking were heroes. Now we're realizing there's a lot of controversy about them. And one of them, is the, essentially the eradication of Native people in North America. And, and I was thinking about that because, you say, well, you're living on land that, here in Toronto, this was a big Indian village at one time, and now it's not. And, and I was thinking that it was a collision, if you think about it was mostly, white people from England. The vast majority of the early settlers came from England or Ireland or Scotland, the British Isles. And I said, why was that? It was an unequal fight when they arrived there. And part of the reason is that by the time that these settlers got there, they had some incredibly well-developed systems, and I'll use our term here of recurring achievement. And just think of all the recurring achievement systems that they had. They had, first of all, they really, really understood farming. They came over and they had recurring farming skills in a way that the natives really didn't have. And they had recurring financial systems. They could think about financial systems, 5 years, 10 years into the future. I'm talking about the 1700s. here. And you go right down the line, and they probably came equipped with systems for recurring achievement that the Indians just didn't have. And one of them is the storage of food. They were the whole notion of salting and of preserving food, canning food, and everything else. The rudiments were already known that. And one simple thing why the white fighters won and the Indian fighters. The Indians didn't have an ability to fight during the winter because they couldn't. They would be using up all their food if they had to fight during the winter. But the Europeans from the British Isles, they knew how to fight. They knew how to stockpile food and have food that didn't put the community in danger, but they could have the food available for fighting. And in England, they fought all year round, and they were used to fighting all year round. Good weather, bad weather, didn't matter. Snow, snow, rain, sleet. It didn't matter what the temperature was. They could fight all year round. Well, if you have one system that can only fight for 6 months of the year, and the other one can fight 12 months of the year, there's a real inequality of capability. But I'm saying all that because it sort of explains why, the Europeans just basically took over the whole continent. They just had these systems of recurring achievement that became more and more automatic and freed up the brightest and the best people, so they didn't have to do that type of work. They could think up new systems of recurring achievement. And it really tells you why there's enormous inequality on the planet when one set of individuals gets onto this idea, the system of recurring achievement. And I think that's really what we're doing in this exercise program. We've taken something which is a real negative, procrastination, which actually was an energy draining, a non-productive factor in both of our lives, and we've transformed it into an energy producing factor. But now we're using the procrastination to identify those achievements that we can do tomorrow, which, if we're smart, we can make them into recurring achievements. So all that's happened in like a 15-month period.
That is true. That's, where do you think you go from here? I mean, what's the thing, like, do you think about, like, where the evolution of this is? Because I was thinking this morning about the actual practical things that we have evolved from that. This has been a really great discussion to think that the context of it is to set up these recurring achievements.
Well, obviously the thing that I'm focusing in is that, again, that's the idea that you introduced or really put emphasis on 2 or 3 podcasts before, is that when you think of something that has to be done, you don't think of how, you think of who. And so what I'm noticing is that, my best attempt to make something recurring is to take the idea of what needs to be done and to put it in a form where somebody else can run with it. And, and not all of them are going to be of equal power in terms of being recurring achievements. But just by what I select as my 3 most important activities for tomorrow, then the faster I can get that idea out of my head and into the head of someone else, but especially in the hands of someone else, the more power each of these procrastination priority days starts to have. Yeah.
I mean, it's. I think I said earlier this, and I may have said it to someone on a More Cheese, Less Whiskers podcast, but this idea that we're really coming into an era now where, because of being so connected to everybody, that execution, the doing of something is actually in most areas becoming a commodity, that it's something that we can actually just deploy in an infinitely scalable supply. You know, and thinking about, we did talk about somebody like Get Leverage, or how that whole ecosystems like that are set up to allow us to execute something. I think it's a real a nice evolution here, and having an interface from ideas to the execution of those ideas at a push of a button, using our highest bandwidth. I still think that the highest bandwidth way to convey something from our head to the world is through our mouth. It's still the highest bandwidth output, you know?
Yeah, I'm more and more convinced of that too. Since we've been talking about it, I'm just watching the difference in power of different conversations at work. And I'm with people, and I'm just watching the difference in skill of people to use their mouths.
Oh, that's so funny.
No, but it's really unequal. The ability of using your mouth is really an unequal skill. And what I mean is that there are some people who are incredibly skillful at it, and some people, not so much. And you can see the difference in the results in their lives just because they have this different skill of using their mouths differently.
Yeah. That all stems from the ability to use their minds differently, to organize the information in a way to output it in a usable format. That's where these thinking skills come in.
Well, the other thing is, the more that you realize that you're not an isolated individual, but that you're in a network of other skilled individuals, you really strive to get better at having your mind set up your mouth properly so that the word gets out in a way that maximizes the value of those networks. I'm surrounded by great riches of talent if I'm smart enough and I'm skillful enough to actually use them. So, I would say, the way I feel right now, I feel incredibly less isolated from other people than I did, let's say, 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of me just working really hard on my own 10 years ago. If I'm working alone, something's wrong. We need a congressional investigation here. Yeah.
Well, the good news is,
I mean, that's really great, and just this ability to talk and to get things across really, really powerfully and persuasively is something that I think humans are gonna, if they're smart, they're gonna get better and better at, because the AI, the artificial intelligence, is growing, but it's going to take a lot of programming to match a really smart talking human.
Yeah, and that's part of the thing, is that I heard Gary Vaynerchuk said something interesting this week, that was, all the talk about A players and how everybody's completely focused on finding A players, and his thought was that you really need C players and B players to just execute.
Yeah,
it's so funny. It's the key. If you're going to scale, B and C players are the key to scaling. You can't. That was his sort of his assertion was that you can't scale if you're constantly just only looking for A players.
Yeah, there's a great story about Ross Perot. Remember Ross Perot, who
I do, yeah,
more or less made Bill Clinton president twice in the 1990s because he took
right.
15 to 20% of the vote away from the Republican candidates. But he was invited, I think it was to Yale or Harvard, I'm not. But one of the business schools, and he got up and he says, well, first thing I'd like you to do, he says, I want to know who all the A graduates are, the graduates here who achieved an A average. And I said, would you please stand up? I just want you all to stand up. And of course they were in the front. And then he said, now, I want to have all the C students, all those who just got, I mean, if you were an F student, you weren't there, but the C students, so a whole bunch of C students got up, and he says, now I want the A students to turn around and look at your future employers.
Oh, that's great. Look around at your future employers.
Yeah.
That is so great. Yeah.
And it half the room laughed, half the congregation, half the congregation laughed because there was a truth to it. Is that the people who think that getting top grades is the answer probably are going to be taking orders from somebody who thinks getting really great ideas is the answer, and not so much getting the top grades. But that's I'm going to think about that because we have team members at Coach. I have one, and she's been with us pretty close to 25 years now, and she's responsible for the integrity of our database. So she comes in every day and spends 8 hours scrutinizing every number, every name, every piece of information that we have about our database. This would be our client database, and if there's any changes to that. And day in, day out for 25 years, she's come in. Usually she's there early and she leaves a little bit late, and this is what she does. And as a result, we've had a very, very high quality database now for 25 years. And my feeling was that she's gotten better at ways that she knows, but it wouldn't be obvious to me how she's gotten better, But I need that person. I absolutely need that skill. I need that, and she loves it. I mean, the other thing is that she takes enormous pride in it. And, that sort of person is irreplaceable, and therefore you want to make life as good as possible for them, to encourage them to, stay with that activity, because it supports hundreds of other activities inside of the program. And a lot of people would say, well, she doesn't have any ambition. Look, she hasn't grown. She hasn't moved from her position in 25 years. And she doesn't want to move from her position in 25 years. So would you call that an A player? Would you call that an A player?
I get it. I've written down, I've got 3 really kind of things I'd love to go into the future calls with these, but one of those is the procrastination organization. Because that, when you're saying that, that's kind of jumped into that. I was reading Ray Dalio has a new book out called Principles. Have you seen it? Or
I just heard it. Someone passed it on. Actually, it was that breakfast I was at with a politician on Friday. Someone brought up the book, so I'm going to have to do that. Like he's kind of richer than everybody, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And that was, what I found interesting was that he learned the interaction between the team members, their unique value. What he started discovering is how Myers-Briggs personality types have a difference. But he didn't mention, I haven't heard him, I've just started that portion of the book now, but whether, like, we talk about Colby as the thing to compare people, but he ended up creating baseball cards for the
everybody's got their statistics.
Yes, exactly. Which that's an interesting because I know that at Strategic Coach, when you walk around, everybody's got their stats posted out on their door.
Well, they all have their they have their they have
Colby.
their Colbys and their strength finders, and then they have their 10 most crucial habits. And that's a function of going through Julia Waller's day, her workshop day, where she takes people deep. Yeah, but I think in the Dahlia system, it's actually what their achievement numbers are too, isn't it?
I don't know. I just started reading about that this morning.
I think their batting average, for example. I mean, whatever that translates into their earn run average and everything like that. I mean that. That which is measured improves. That which is measured and reported improves exponentially. That's Pearson's law, and I think it's absolutely true. And I'm kind of late in coming to this in lifetime. I have to tell you, I'm much more passionate about reported numbers today than I was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're doing quite a bit better 10 years later.
I love it.
I think the two are related. Great talk.
It really was. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, I'll see you very, very shortly. So one discussion is systems of recurring achievements. That's a nice discussion point. I like that.
Yeah, I like that. And the team element is another thing. Driving procrastination, using procrastination as a driver for an organization is really a pretty interesting.
The procrastination-driven organization.
Yes, exactly.
Good. That's great.
I love it.
Okay.
Okay, Dan, I'll see you this week.
Okay, bye.
Bye.